I never planned on spending my Saturday morning buried in a dusty garage, but there I was, surrounded by mountains of forgotten junk. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and rusted metal, and a layer of dust coated my fingertips as I opened a battered cardboard box. Inside, buried under piles of stale receipts and cracked picture frames, was an old photo album. I was slow to pick it up, running my fingers across the cracked leather cover. I hadn't seen it in decades. With a weird combination of excitement and trepidation stirring in my gut, I flipped it open. And then there she was. Me, but not the woman I saw every morning in the mirror. It was a version of myself that I had almost forgotten existed. The photo was taken at a summer, years ago beach party. I was laughing, a drink in one hand, wearing a sundress that hugged my younger frame. The carefree smile on my face felt almost foreign. A lump had formed in my throat. When had I stopped looking like that? More importantly, when had I stopped feeling like that? I barely had time to process the wave of emotions washing over me when I heard the unmistakable creak of the garage door behind me. My body stiffened. I turned, expecting a neighbor or a delivery man, but instead, standing in the doorway, was him. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, a confident smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Didn't think I'd see you here," he said casually, stepping inside. His voice was deeper than I remembered, more self-assured. I blinked, still caught off guard. It had been years, 10, maybe more since I had seen him. Then he was just a young man, still figuring himself out. But now, as he stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, and completely at ease, I realized how much time had passed. I forced a smile, trying to mask my surprise. "I could say the same about you." His eyes flickered to the photo album in my lap. "What's that?" I hesitated a half second before closing the book. "Just some old memories," I said, pushing it aside. But he'd already seen it. And something about the way he looked at me in that second like he was seeing me for the very first time sent this strange, unfamiliar thrill down my spine. I told myself it was nothing, just nostalgia, nothing more. But I was wrong. I should have tucked the album away, changed the subject, done something to break the moment. But I didn't. Instead, I watched him pick it up, flipping through the pages in quiet curiosity. "You look different," he said, stopping at a picture of me in a red dress, dancing under neon lights. His gaze lingered. I laughed, uneasy. It was another lifetime. Was it? He glanced up, an unreadable mask settling onto his features. The softness with which he'd asked made my gut clench. I'd had years invested into the fact that my youth had passed, the unwavering hope for something that came hand in hand with the thrill of doing something also belonged to yesterday. And then, right here in the garage, surrounded by my previous life, things felt different. "I didn't know you used to be like this," he said, tapping the edge of one of the photographs. I shrugged. "People change." He smirked. "Or maybe they just forget who they are." It was a mean thing to say because it rang a little true. I glanced at the time. "It's getting late. You probably should. Let's go somewhere." The tone was casual, but the words were said with intention. I frowned. "Go where?" "You'll see." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to refuse. But somewhere deep inside me, something wild wanted to say yes. And so I did. The cool night air as we drove down the deserted highway, the lights of the city receding behind us. I hadn't asked where we were going, and he hadn't told me. There was a kind of liberation in that. Just going and not knowing where. We drove to a quiet lake spot, a place I hadn't gone in years. The water was sparkling under the moonlight, with only trees rustling and, somewhere very far away, traffic humming. He reached over to the back seat and brought out a bottle, holding it up with a grin. "You still drink this?" I squinted at the label. It was my favorite wine, one I hadn't had in ages. "How did you know?" I asked. He shrugged. "I notice things." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just sat down on the grass, letting the cool breeze brush over me. He poured us each a glass, and for a while, we just drank in silence. This is nice, I finally admitted. Told you, he said, smirking. You just needed a little reminder. I didn't argue, but deep down I knew it was more than that. Something about being here, with him, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. I should have been more careful, but in that moment I didn't want to be. The air felt heavier as the night stretched on. We sat close, the space between us shrinking with every passing moment. I could feel his eyes on me, studying me in a way that made my pulse quicken. You've changed, he said, quieter now. I exhaled slow, keeping my gaze on the water. Everyone does. He didn't respond, just watched me, his face unreadable. Then, in one of those moments that felt inevitable yet impossible all at once, it happened. I didn't know who moved first. Perhaps it was him. Maybe it was me. But suddenly, the air between us wasn't empty anymore. It was charged with something neither of us had planned. It lasted only a second, but that second felt like forever. When we pulled away, reality came crashing down. We shouldn't have, I whispered. He didn't argue. He just looked at me, his jaw tight, as if trying to process what we had just done. The night felt colder now. The silence between us stretched too long. I wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. I turned away, clutching the fabric of my sweater like it could anchor me. We should go, I finally said. He hesitated, then nodded. The drive home was silent. Silence swallowed us whole at the exact instant he pulled onto my driveway and continued to ring out long past. My hand was clenching the door handle, fingers white, though I made no move to change that. He and I, it still hung like an incomplete sentence in a heavy gray air. Finally, I stammered out, I should go. He didn't answer right away. His fingers drummed lightly against the steering wheel as he stared straight ahead. Yeah, he said, but his voice was full of hesitation. I opened the door, stepped out into the cool night air. Every fiber in my body urged me to let this go, pretend it never happened. But as I reached the porch, I heard him call my name. I turned, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. For a moment, he just looked at me, like he was trying to memorize something, like he knew this was the last time. Then he said it. I wish I'd met you sooner. The words knocked the breath from my lungs. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, because deep down, I knew the truth. If we had met under different circumstances, maybe things would have been different. But that wasn't our reality. And now, there was nowhere to go but back. I forced a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach my eyes. Good night, I whispered. I turned then, stepping inside, closing the door behind me. I leaned against it, exhaling shakily. My heart still pounded, my thoughts racing. The room felt too quiet, too still. And yet, in that moment, something clicked. I wasn't the same woman who had opened that photo album this morning. That woman was gone. Whatever had happened tonight, whatever it had awakened in me, I couldn't unsee it now. Neither could he.